Okay, so um the I tried to include some contemporary theories in this course. I'm probably going to change it a little as time goes on. The two contemporary theories that I included are the theories that are included in most textbooks, and if the reason I included them are if a contemporary theory is going to be on the comps or the NCE, it'll probably be solution focused or narrative. They've had enough time to create questions and norm those questions for those exams. But I will probably include a couple more contemporary theories, um, probably IFS, internal family systems, probably, I don't know, maybe ACT or a few others. So there are a few other newer theories that people like to use. Um, I think they're based on earlier theories, really, but you know, they seem to be getting a following and they have certifications and all kinds of stuff. So I might try to include those in the future. But the reason I chose these two is because they're probably going to be on the comps if a contemporary theory is on the comps. Um, so last week we went over solution focused. Um, and tonight we're going to talk about narrative therapy. I started writing a paper with a student some years ago just because they were interested in it and wanted to do it. Um, one of the one of the ideas that I had was that, nothing is highly original anymore. EMDR is pretty original. Um, but But when we think about narrative therapy, it harkens all the way back to Jungian theory with his concept of myth, metaphor, and archetype, and uh, and how each of our lives becomes a narrative. So if we look back at Jung and these basic ideas of myth, metaphor, and archetype, he believed that certain roles play out over and over again in multiple cultures. Uh, and the interesting thing about this is that he looked at different cultures and he found very similar themes playing out. They went by different names, but the theme of the narratives, uh, you know, were very similar, and these cultures never had anything to do with each other. They never came into contact. So he believed that humanity drew upon very specific myths and archetypes, and later on, we had, uh, basically um, Joseph Campbell, uh, anthropologist, social anthropologist, um, who wrote about these themes and investigated them from a whole different angle. And so I guess he's famous for writing the book The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And, so it's this concept of how individuals go on kind of a mythic journey. They overcome obstacles. Um, but, so if you pick Hercules, you know, uh, he defeats all of these monsters and everything. But there was always a time when that hero not only has to face an external obstacle, but they have to confront their internal obstacles as well. They have to confront their internal self doubt. They have to overcome what is holding themselves back internally. So it's the same with every human being. We are each on a journey throughout our lives. We have to overcome external obstacles. You've got to pass this course. You've got to overcome internal obstacles. We might go to therapy. We might learn from our mistakes. We might learn from one another. And so I think once I taught my kids this, uh, they watch Disney movies and they're watching Moana and, she's about to give up on the boat and they're like, it's her moment of doubt. She has to overcome this internal struggle. And, with the help of a spiritual grandmother, she does. But even that is kind of a metaphor for all that she had learned from her deceased grandmother. So, I think that every great story, every great myth, every great religion has this same journey. It's the mythic journey. And we learn from that journey. I think that it involves all kinds of things. It involves sacrifice and love and doubt and giving and generosity and selflessness. So, you know, part of being human is learning from our mistakes. Uh, you know, so I think that, and then, so then we had Joseph Campbell, and he looks at this from all different world cultures. And then we had a guy named Northrop Frye, and he applied this to literature. So he would apply it to Shakespeare, and he would apply it to all the great stories that have been written. And you could see how people who wrote what we will call classics in literature all drew upon these same themes. And then there was a guy named Paul Ricoeur, and he applied this to religious literature like scripture and other writings. And the same, themes arose. And so it moves across all of the fields, including, and I would say most importantly, psychology, because ultimately these themes are about our own internal struggles and overcoming them. And so later, fast forward, and we have narrative therapy. And narrative therapy takes this concept and tries to implement it in a therapeutic venue. And so there's a number of different ways to go about this. So I'll give you a number of examples. So the first thing we might do is we might have a client share their past or present narrative that may be negative. Okay. And then, well, let's just talk about that first. So they could either share their own, or they can share their own, and then we ask them to come up with a metaphor. So I had a young teenage female client, and she had been happy. She had been living with her father. The mother was no longer in the picture for one reason or another, and got along great with her dad, was excelling in school, and did chores, did her homework, all of that. But then her father began dating somebody, and they got married. And the 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 girl changed emotionally as a result of this new person in their lives. And you know, and there was arguing and anger and wasn't doing well in school. And So she came to me for counseling. And so she told me this whole story about how horrible her life was and how this woman was just an evil stepmother and how she was telling her to do all of these chores and she was being punished and everything else. And so we mapped out her current story with all of its horrendous uh, occasions. And then I said, well, can you think of a metaphor of another story? Maybe you've read about it or seen it in a movie or a television show that reminds you of your own life. And she thought about it. She was a big Disney fan. And so she said, yeah, I'm just like Cinderella. And I'm like, yeah, sounds like it. And so we began to talk about Cinderella. And I said, well, you know, chances are you might not have a fairy godmother appear. So you might have to take control of the situation yourself. So I want to empower the client to make change. And I wanted to think about something that the client would want to change, something that was within her power, something that she wanted to change. So I said, well, what happens, when you're arguing with your, stepmom and things get escalated and it's turns negative? She says, well, I go to my room, I slam my door, and I stay in there the rest of the night. And I said, oh, okay. So it's quiet there. There's no more arguing. That's like your sanctuary. That's your safe place. She says, yes. And I said, okay, well, if you're going to spend time in your room, why don't you make it like the best room possible? Why don't you clean it and organize it and decorate it the way you want to? Like, put a major effort into making this your happy place. And she thought that was a great idea. So came back the next week. I said, well, how'd it go with your room? And she says, it's fantastic. I love my room. I feel comfortable there. Everything's clean and neat and organized. And I put up pictures and I decorated. And, but you know what? Not only that, but my stepmom was super happy with me that I cleaned my room. And we got along all day long. And I said, wow, imagine that. And so we made that chapter one. And then I said, well, can you remember back before your mom entered the picture? And what kind of things did you do to help your dad out? Since it was just the two of you, I bet you had a lot of responsibilities. And she said, yes, I helped him do the dishes and I packed my lunch for school the next day. And I said, oh, are you doing that now? And she said, no. Um, and I said, well, maybe you could go back to the way it was and you could help your dad out and still do some of that. She said, yeah, I'd like to do that. It wasn't bad. And so it became chapter two. And so we went 2 months, 8 sessions. And would you believe it? By the end of those 8 sessions, her and her stepmom, it wasn't perfect, but they were getting along. She was no longer an evil stepmom. Somehow the mother had changed. But so uh but in reality, uh, she made very gradual changes of her own free will. And so by the end, we had an entire storyline. And what I do with youngsters, is I created all of these blank comic book pages. So like I would have a big square that covered a whole page, and it would have a square at the top for words. And so that would be the cover. And then I had like in a comic book, all different size boxes so they could tell the storyline. And they kind of like the idea of creating their own comic book rather than it being so serious. And but they can do, if I have adults or teenagers or young kids, they can do whatever they're called to do. They could draw, they could just write like it was a diary. They could tell me their story if that was too much. But I do like they could create art, they could create music, they could create poetry, whatever expressive arts they wanted to use to depict this narrative and to change that narrative in a positive direction. And so I do like having something concrete, but if they really don't want to, they can tell me their story verbally. But I like the concrete thing because I like them to see the change. I like them to see the growth. And I like them to have the self-awareness that it was in their control. So, this is not like a miracle. They can only change things that are in their control. Now, the stepmom wasn't in this girl's control, but her actions were, and those actions resulted in a reaction. But a lot of times, bad things happen to people, and we can't change that, but we can change the reaction to those things. So, no, I can't make a change if something bad happens or, like if there's a loss or a divorce or something like that. But we can change the reaction to that negative event. And that's all a client is in control of, So no, it might not be perfect. It might not be exactly what they want, but what they want is not within their control. There's a lot of things that I want that are not within my control. But there are things that I can do. And the one thing that I can control is how I react to events. So if you think about it, this theory really draws from Jung, it draws from reality, it draws from REBT and CBT, it draws from a lot of other theories, even existential theory. And it places it in this unique package that every human being can relate to. And I think that once people realize that, yeah, it's nice that this girl's story started out resembling Cinderella's and it became her own, but there's a bigger picture, each of our lives is a journey. Each of our lives, has obstacles externally and internally. Each of our lives, is a narrative. And so it's not just for the time that they're in therapy. They can carry this bigger picture out for the rest of their lives. And if they think about their lives as kind of a narrative, do they want that narrative to be a positive narrative? You know? Um, so, I think that's kind of a neat, larger picture that they can carry with them, that it's not just this one part of their lives, but it's their entire journey. So what are your thoughts about this theory, narrative therapy? I gave you kind of the highlighted version of it, but you get the idea of what can be done. Yeah.
So did the client think the change was in the stepmother, or was the client able to tell that it was therapy?
So, yeah, they were pretty young. They were like 12 or 13,
Oh,
young teenager. But so at first, they were really happy with how their stepmom had changed. But, then that's why I like having the concrete thing. Well, let's look at your story. Oh, look, you did all of this. Your stepmom didn't do any of it. you cleaned your room and you helped the family with dishes and you did this. You wanted to succeed in school because you used to do very well and you took some pride in that. So you started doing your homework again. All of these things you chose to do. But I never want it to sound like, oh, see, you were fooled into doing something. I want to empower them and say, wow, you were able to make a difference. Yeah. So I want them to feel good about the change. What else?
I think I really like the idea of the expression through art because sometimes people just aren't very good about communicating their feelings. So it gives them an option to express that and maybe make that a conversation or a story that doesn't feel like so intimidating.
Sure. And like I use expressive arts, all kinds of arts, music, everything else. I think the only thing is that this you might find a little more directive rather than non-directive. So it does add a little more direction to the process. What else? Yeah.
Yes, about change. Change is very difficult to actually make happen. So it kind of gets them to visualize what they can do to help their current situation.
Yeah, so in case you didn't hear it, she said she liked that it makes them think about change, that they can create change in their lives rather than just change happening to us and being passive. We can be an active part of the change. That's what Gandhi always said, be the change you want to see in the world. What else?